This is our family now, old man. You're just a guest here. My son-in-law said those words while standing in my living room, in front of the fireplace I had built with my own hands 23 years ago. He wasn't whispering. He wanted everyone at my Thanksgiving table to hear it. I looked at him for a long moment, then set down my carving knife, wiped my hands on the dish towel I'd had since my wife was alive, and did something that none of them saw coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories, and drop a comment telling us what time it is where you are right now. We read every single one. The smell of roasting turkey had been in the air since 4 in the morning. I'd been up before the sun, the way I always am, standing at the kitchen counter in the house I bought in 1999 with money I earned working double shifts at Hargrove Electrical Supply for 11 years. The stuffing recipe was my mother's. Cornbread sage, a handful of pecans, a splash of bourbon that she always called the secret. My hands moved through the mixture by feel alone. I've made it so many times I could do it blind. Nobody had offered to help. That wasn't new. My name is Raymond Calloway. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a master electrician, built my own small contracting company in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, sold it in 2019 when my knees finally told me they were done climbing ladders. My wife, Carol, passed from cancer in 2017. We had one son, Derek. He was the best thing we ever made together. And for a long time, I believed that completely. Derek met his wife, Stacy, at a sales conference in Houston 6 years ago. She was sharp, well-dressed, the kind of woman who made a strong first impression. I liked her at first. I want to be honest about that. I made every effort. I told myself that Derek was happy, and that was what mattered. They married in the fall of 2020. Small ceremony because of the pandemic. I gave Derek a check for $15,000 to cover what insurance didn't pay for the venue. He thanked me by text. Stacy sent a card that was clearly store-bought. I told myself it didn't matter. The call came 18 months later, March 2022. I was out on the back porch watching the sun go down over the yard when Derek's number came up on my screen. Dad, we're in trouble. Stacy's company laid her off. My commissions are down. We can't cover the mortgage on the Houston place, and we've got nothing saved. We need somewhere to go, just for a few months while we figure it out. I asked him if he'd looked at other options. Dad, you've got 4 bedrooms. You're alone in that house. It would just be temporary. I want to tell you I paused. I want to tell you I thought it through carefully and weighed the risks like a reasonable man. But he was my son, and he sounded like he was drowning. And Carol wasn't there to talk sense into either of us. So I said yes. They arrived on a Saturday with a moving truck. Not a car with a few bags. A full moving truck. I helped them carry boxes for 3 hours without anyone asking if my knees were holding up. The first 6 months were tolerable. Stacy cooked occasionally. Derek helped with yard work once or twice. They said thank you at dinner. Things seemed like they might work out. Month 7, Stacy rearranged the living room without asking and threw away an end table that Carol had picked out at an antique fair in Shreveport. I mentioned it. She said it was damaged, and it had been time to let it go. Month 9, Derek started calling the house our place when he talked to friends on the phone, not in front of me. But the walls in that house are thin, and I have good ears. Month 11, they got a dog without asking. A large one. The dog destroyed 2 sections of baseboard in the hallway I had installed myself. Derek said he'd fix it. He didn't. Month 14, Stacy told me she needed me to stop using the kitchen before 7 in the morning because the sounds woke her up. I had been waking at 5:30 my entire adult life. I told her that was the kitchen. She said she understood, but could I please try? I tried for about a week. Month 17, I came home for my Thursday poker night with my neighbor Gerald Thibodeau to find they had moved my recliner into the spare room and replaced it with a sectional they had ordered online. With my credit card, which Derek had borrowed the month before to buy what he called a temporary necessity. He had never returned the card. I found the charge on my statement 3 weeks later, $1,140. Derek said it was a misunderstanding. He would pay me back. He used that phrase a great deal. I kept records. I had been keeping records since month 2, when something in my gut told me that this was going to be a longer story than anyone was admitting. I was an electrician and a business owner for 30 years. Documentation is a reflex. My ledger told the truth plainly. $15,000 for the wedding. $22,000 in direct cash I had given Derek over 18 months. For car repairs. A medical bill. Back rent they owed in Houston when they finally let the place go, and what Derek described as a bridge loan to cover a business opportunity that went nowhere. Utility bills had climbed from roughly $200 a month to nearly $500. Groceries had doubled. The credit card charge. I estimated the total somewhere north of $65,000. Not once had either of them mentioned repayment. In the early months, Derek sometimes brought it up himself. Unprompted, promising timelines that passed without acknowledgement. After month 12, he stopped mentioning it entirely. After month 18, if I brought up money, Stacy would leave the room, and Derek would get a look on his face like I had said something cruel. Gerald noticed. He's 71, retired from the Orleans Parish School District, has been my neighbor and my poker partner for 16 years. His wife, Dolores, had known Carol. He started checking in more often after Carol passed, and I trusted his instincts. Raymond, he told me one evening on my front porch, you need to decide if you're a hotel or a father, because right now you're paying like a hotel and being treated like neither. I told him I was handling it. He looked at me over his glasses. You're avoiding it. That's different. He wasn't wrong. Thanksgiving arrived the way Thanksgiving does in Louisiana, all at once, and humid even in November. I had been cooking since 4 in the morning. Turkey, dirty rice, sweet potato casserole, the cornbread stuffing, Carol's recipes, all of them. I made enough for 12 because Derek had invited his friends from his new job, a sales position he had started in September. Stacy had invited her sister Pauline and Pauline's husband, a man named Brett who had the handshake of someone who had taken a seminar about handshakes. I set the table with the good dishes. Ivory with a thin gold rim, bought in 2001 from a shop on Magazine Street in New Orleans during a trip Carol and I took for our anniversary. I had not used them since she died. I got them out for this occasion because it was Thanksgiving, and it was my house, and I wanted to. By 2 o'clock, the house was full of people I had mostly never met, eating food I had started cooking 10 hours earlier. Derek moved through the rooms playing host. Stacy floated behind him arranging things and laughing at Brett's comments. Nobody offered to help carry anything from the kitchen. I brought out the turkey, on the platter Carol had used every year, the one with the harvest. Hey, Pops. We've got it set up a certain way here. Stacy waved a hand toward the corner without looking at me. Raymond, we saved you a spot. You'll be more comfortable over there. There's more room. The table went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when everyone knows something is wrong, and nobody wants to be the one to say so. Derek looked at his plate. I stood there for a moment in the house I had bought, at the table I had owned for 20 years, looking at my son, who was looking at his plate. Then Stacy said, without looking up, this is our family now, Raymond. We've made it work. You're part of it. Of course you are. She finally glanced toward me with something that was almost pity. But we need you to understand that things have changed. Our family. I looked at Derek. He picked up his fork. Something shifted in my chest. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter and colder than either. The thing that happens when the last excuse you had been telling yourself finally runs out of road. I had been making excuses for 2 years. They were struggling. Derek was my blood. Carol would have wanted me to help. Family means sacrifice. I had told myself these things so many times they had worn grooves in my thinking, like water in limestone. But Carol had also told me once, during an argument we'd had about a different situation entirely, Raymond, you can love someone completely and still not let them walk on you. In fact, if you love them right, you won't. I pulled my hand back from my chair. I walked calmly to the kitchen. I heard Brett say something behind me, heard Stacy laugh lightly, heard the sound of the dinner resuming. They thought I was complying. I opened the kitchen drawer where I keep important papers and retrieved what I had put there 3 days earlier, just in case. Because Gerald was right. I had been avoiding, but I had also been preparing. The way you do when you know in your bones that something is coming, even when you pray, it won't. I walked back to the dining room doorway. The table had settled into the comfortable noise of people eating and talking without concern. I waited until the room noticed me standing there. Then I spoke at a volume that required no effort to hear. I need everyone's attention for just a moment. This house belongs to me. I bought it in 1999. The deed is in my name. The mortgage was paid off in 2014. I have never charged my son or his wife a single dollar of rent, and I have given them, in cash and covered expenses, More than $65,000 over the past 2 years. They promised to repay it. They have not. The room was completely still. I looked at Derek, who had finally looked up. I am asking every guest in this home to please gather your things. Dinner is over. I'm sorry to do this on a holiday. That is not lost on me. But I've been a guest in my own home for long enough. Brett put down his fork with a sound that seemed very loud. Stacy found her voice first. Raymond, you cannot be serious. You're embarrassing Derek in front of his colleagues. These are his work relationships. I looked at her steadily. Then Derek should have considered that before tonight. Derek stood up. Dad. His voice had the strained quality of a man who knew he had no argument and was about to make one anyway. You can't just blow up Thanksgiving. This is insane. You're acting like a crazy person. I reached into the folder in my hand and removed a single sheet of paper, which I set on the table where everyone at the table could see it if they leaned forward. Gerald had helped me prepare it. He had spent 30 years dealing with school district legal matters, and he understood the value of a document that looked official. It was a formal notice of termination of guest residency. 272 words. It named Derek and Stacy specifically. It gave them 14 days to vacate. Gerald had looked it over twice. The guests began to stand, not all at once. But the movement started at the far end of the table and worked its way inward, the way a wave moves. Brett was already reaching for his jacket. Pauline touched Stacy's arm and said something quiet. One of Derek's colleagues, a young man named what I would later learn was Marcus, said quietly on his way past me, "Sir, I'm really sorry." He sounded like he meant it. They filed out in 4 minutes. The food sat untouched on the table. Then it was just the three of us. Derek, Stacy, and me. Stacy's composure cracked first. You just humiliated us in front of Derek's entire team. Do you understand what you've done? He could lose clients over this. You may have just cost him his job. I remained standing in the doorway. You can stay through the 14 days. I'll be civil. But the notice is real, and the date is real. Derek tried 3 more times. He said they had nowhere to go. He said I was acting out of grief, that I had never recovered from losing Carol. And this was the result. He said I owed him more than this, that he was my son, and sons were supposed to be able to count on their fathers. That last one was the hardest to hear. Not because it was true, because it almost worked. I thought about Carol's voice. I thought about the end table from the antique fair in Shreveport that Stacy had thrown away without asking. I thought about Derek looking at his plate while Brett sat in my chair. I told him good night and went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning I called Gerald and told him what had happened. He came over within the hour with 2 cups of coffee from the place on Perkins Road that he knows I like. You really did it, he said. I really did. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table. Now comes the part where they try to undo it. He was correct. Stacy's first approach was tears. She sat across from me the following afternoon and cried in a way that was impressively sustained, and explained that I had never given her a real chance, that she had tried so hard to make a home here, that my grief had made me unreachable, and she had only ever wanted to help. I listened completely. Then I told her the 14 days stood. Derek's approach was anger, then negotiation, then a kind of quiet desperation that was harder to watch. He told me he had been sending out resumes. He told me he had leads on an apartment. He told me he just needed more time. I told him he had 14 days and I hoped he used them well. On day 9, they left. Not at the end of the 14 days. Day 9. I think the weight of it became too much to sit inside. I watched the same moving truck pull out of my driveway that had pulled in 26 months earlier, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Relief. The particular relief of a man who finally put down something very heavy he had been carrying so long, he forgot it wasn't supposed to be his to carry. I changed the locks that afternoon. 3 days later, Derek called. His voice was controlled, careful, the way his voice gets when he's decided on a strategy. Dad, we need to talk about what you said at the table, about the money. I told him I was glad he brought it up. Those were gifts, he said. You gave that money because you wanted to help. You can't turn gifts into loans after the fact. I let him finish. Then I told him I had documentation. Every transfer, every check, every cash withdrawal. I had emails from him in which he had used the word repay. I had a text message from 18 months ago in which he wrote, Dad, I promise we will pay back every cent. I just need you to trust me right now. Silence on his end. I told him I intended to file a civil claim for the documented amount if we could not reach an agreement. I told him I had spoken with an attorney, which was true. Gerald's son-in-law practiced civil law in Baton Rouge and had reviewed my documentation and told me the case was straightforward. Derek said I was destroying the family. I told him I hadn't destroyed anything. I told him I had spent 2 years watching something be dismantled piece by piece, and I had finally decided to stop letting it happen. He hung up. The civil filing went in on a Tuesday morning in January. $66,400 in documented transfers and covered expenses. Gerald sat with me at his kitchen table the night before while I signed everything. 2 old men with cups of decaf and a stack of bank statements. "You're certain?" he asked. "I've been certain since Thanksgiving," I told him. I just needed the paperwork to catch up. Derek and Stacy retained an attorney, a man named Forsyth, who sent a letter asserting that the transfers had been gifts given voluntarily and without expectation of return, and that my suit was the retaliatory action of a grieving widower who had grown emotionally dependent on his son and was now punishing him for establishing healthy independence. I read that letter 3 times. The 3rd time I almost laughed. Gerald actually did laugh when I read it to him. Healthy independence. They lived rent-free in your house for over 2 years, and that's healthy independence. The hearing was set for March in the 19th Judicial District Court on the 4th floor of the courthouse on Street Blaze Avenue. I wore the jacket I had worn to Carol's funeral, which sounds morbid, but which she had picked out and which fit me well and made me feel like she was nearby. Derek and Stacy sat at the opposite table with Forsyth. Derek was in a new suit that didn't fit quite right. Stacy sat very straight with her hands folded. Neither of them looked at me when I walked in. The judge was a man named Arsenault, 50s, the unhurried manner of someone who has presided over enough human foolishness to find it neither surprising nor particularly interesting. He reviewed the materials. He asked Forsyth twice to clarify specific points, and both times Forsyth's clarifications were less clear than the original question. Then Gerald's son-in-law, my attorney, walked through the documentation, transfer by transfer, email by email. The text message in which Derek had promised to repay every cent appeared on a screen at the front of the courtroom in a font large enough for everyone present to read without difficulty. Forsyth argued that the text had been sent during an emotional moment and should not be construed as a legally binding promise. Judge Arsenault looked at him the way a man looks at someone who has just said something he cannot quite believe was said aloud. "Judgment for the plaintiff," he said. "Full amount plus court costs." Derek's face did something complicated. Stacy stared at the table. Forsyth gathered his papers with the practiced efficiency of a man who had lost gracefully before. In the hallway outside, Derek found me before I reached the elevator. His voice was low, and for the first time in a long time it sounded like him. Not the Derek who had let Brett sit in my chair. Not the Derek who had looked at his plate on Thanksgiving. The one who used to call me on Sunday evenings just to talk. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry. I mean that. I let things get bad. I let her set the tone, and I told myself you could handle it, and I knew that wasn't the truth. I looked at my son. He's 38 years old, and he looked about 12 standing there in that hallway. I know the money is the money," he said. "We'll figure out a payment plan. I'm not running from it. But I need you to know that I know what I did, what I didn't do. I told him I heard him. I told him hearing it mattered to me. I told him that trust was something we were going to have to build back one Sunday phone call at a time, and that I was willing to try if he was, but that willing to try and automatically trusted were not the same thing and might not be for a while." He nodded. He understood. Stacy had already gone. Gerald was waiting for me outside on the courthouse steps in the pale March sun. He had a thermos of coffee because he knew the courthouse coffee was terrible. "Well," he said. "Well," I said. We walked to where he'd parked, 2 old men on a Tuesday morning in Baton Rouge, and I thought about Carol, the way I do every single day. And I thought about the end table from Shreveport that was gone now. And I thought about the fact that sometimes loving someone correctly means requiring them to face what they've done, and that this is one of the harder lessons a father has to learn, and one of the harder ones a son has to receive. The payment plan was established in April. $700 a month. Derek's name only. The divorce from Stacy had been filed in February, 10 weeks after Thanksgiving. I learned this from Derek himself, not from any satisfaction in it, just as a fact that arrived the way facts do. He calls on Sunday evenings now. We talk about his job, about the apartment he found in Metairie, about the Saints, about small things. We are rebuilding something. I don't know yet what shape it will take. Carol would probably tell me to be patient and to pay attention, that the shape of a thing reveals itself if you give it enough time. Gerald and I played poker last Thursday. He won more than he should have and was gracious about it, which is the worst kind of winning. Afterward, we sat on my front porch in the dark for a while without saying much. He asked me at some point if I felt like I had won. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I feel like I stayed myself, I told him. Through all of it, I stayed myself. And I'm still in my house, at my table, in my chair. He nodded like that was the right answer. I picked up my coffee cup and looked out at the yard that I have been tending for 25 years, the oak tree in the far corner that Carol planted as a sapling the year we moved in, the porch boards I replaced myself 3 summers ago, the neighborhood going quiet the way it does on a Thursday night in November. Everything the same, everything different. My house, my peace, my life. If you've been through something like this, leave a comment below. Tell us what time it is, where you are, and whether you think I made the right call. Subscribe to Pure Revenge Stories for more, and click the video on the left to hear what happens next.